have more fans than SBE, don't I? Come on. Come on. Not yet. Okay. Ah, there we go. Okay, we will like and share that. Get this distribution started here. And now we'll go back to my feed. And we will share this over to This Week in Radio Tech. There we go. Posting. And one more switch. We'll get this over to the Broadcasting Club, where Larry Janis is particularly popular. Aren't you, Larry?
I'm a recovering broadcast engineer.
That'd be a good title for a group. Let's see.
It lasted a few years before I went over the wall. Yep.
All right, and posted that. Okay, we are posted everywhere now. As soon as this finishes up, come on, Facebook, you can do it. I know the database is huge, but there we go. All right, good. We can officially start now as soon as I get back on this page. There we go. All right. Hey, everybody who is waiting for the live feed of This Week in Radio Tech, you're in luck. We are live, and our distribution model is all taken care of. Suncast is at the controls. Thank you, Suncast. And let's see. Do I have? Oh, yeah, I do have a little bit of mic metering there. Sorry, it's kind of low. I'm trying out a different webcam today. Don't know if I like it or not. It was making me look green, and Suncast put his magic on that and fixed that. But, I do other stuff besides this podcast. So Suncast isn't always here to fix things. I have to, I don't know, I may go back to the other webcam. This one's sharper looking, but the colors aren't right. And it's got too much automatic stuff, and some of it I can't seem to turn off. So I don't know, jury's out. I was trying not to spend $1,500 on a mirrorless DSLR, so I spent $150, and I don't know if I'm happy. Okay, enough of that. Enough inside baseball. Let's get started with the show. Episode 704 of This Week in Radio Tech, and we will begin in 3, 2. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to that light bulb at the top of the tower. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host here in the Telos Alliance studio in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm so happy that Telos Alliance, I'm a full-time employee, but hey, they give me a hour and a half or so on Thursdays to do this podcast, and I really appreciate my employer, Telos Alliance, for giving me a little bit of leeway on that. Here's the show where we get to talk about broadcast engineering and sometimes related things. Our guest today is a real broadcast engineer. At least he has been on and off, but he also designs some amazing circuitry. And I'm not going to say any more. I'll let him tell you about it. Chris Tarr is off today. He is traveling through sweltering Texas heat on his way to go purchase another used transmitter. At least that's what I understand. We'll get an update from him next week. All right, let's bring in our guest. Our guest from the southeast side of Florida, it is Larry Janis. Larry, welcome in. It's good to see you.
Hi, Kirk. Great to finally be connected. We talked about this last year, and I guess when I spoke to you on the phone a few days ago, I said, yeah, maybe, I guess Charo canceled from the Tonight Show here. I get bumped. Remember that when they'd have like the last guest would get bumped because the Tony Randall went too long. So Jack Hanna from the San Diego Zoo would, show up. Yeah. So anyway, instead of real significant, important people, you ended up with me instead. And I'm just happy to be here.
You are, hey, believe me, you are no Charo. As a 11, 12, 13-year-old kid, I thought Charo was the hottest thing around. I mean, you're a nice guy, but you ain't no Charo.
No, coochie, yeah.
Yeah,
But
coochie
no, great
coochie.
to be
That's right.
here and to share my the fruit of my loins here, this digital and tube stuff. So let me
Well,
center everything.
we're definitely gonna get into that, and I want to hear more about what you do. We're gonna take our first little commercial break. By the way, that reference to Charo, for those of you who don't know, Charo, this Latin entertainer lady, and she's very sexy looking and played the guitar, and very talented lady, and danced and shook her little body and all that. And Larry, I forgot about this, but she was usually like booked as the extra guest that they never had time for unless they had a guest cancel. So if Charo was on, it was often because somebody couldn't make it or canceled. Kind of feels like me when I did the weather on TV. Can you do the weather on Saturday? Sure. Who's in jail? So, hey, our show is brought to you in part by Nautel. Folks at Nautel, you know them. They're lovely people, and they make fantastic AM and FM transmitters and a lot of HD stuff. Well, they got this deal going on right now. It's the Nautel HD Digital Radio Test Drive. And the test drive is an offering that is intended to break down these barriers that are keeping many broadcasters from trying HD radio. Hey, that sure applied to me. I'm part owner of some small stations, and we finally did HD in Oxford, Mississippi, where we're running a total of 3 HD channels there. HD radio transmission has the potential to create critical presence on the car dashboard, and stations can help stay competitive in the field of plenty of alternate media choices. Now, it's based on Nautel's software air chain technology. HD Digital Radio Test Drive allows you, the broadcaster, to try HD radio transmission in your market for up to 6 months and to try to unlock more listeners, put out more content, and maybe get some new revenue without needing to install and purchase upwards of $40,000 or $50,000 worth of HD gear. So, for a minimal cost option, you can test new revenue generating streams, experiment with new formats, I should say. Maybe you've got a larger Hispanic population and you want to serve them. Maybe you've got some high school sports that you really want to turn to on Friday nights. There's a lot of ways to do. Maybe there's a format that's missing in your market, and you'd like to fill that gap. You can counter competing alternate media, like you find on your Wi-Fi or in your car dashboard. And here's what you need to get started. You need to lease or purchase a GV2 upgrade, a GV2 transmitter, or upgrade your older GV transmitter to a GV2. You need an Xperi main station or equivalent license and a signed trial agreement with Nautel. And then you need to supply some content from 1 to 4 channels of content delivered to your transmitter via or to the Multicast Plus box via Livewire or AES 67. So check that out. It can save you a ton of money right now just to give it a try. And I really appreciate Nautel coming up with this idea to let you try something before you buy it. Hey, you can get your logos, you can get your album art on your HD radios. You can really serve your public in ways that radio hasn't been able to before HD radio. And I promise you now it's easier than ever. I could do it. I had a little help, but I could do it. And so can you. Nautel, appreciate your help on this terrific idea. Nautel.com. All right. Guest today is Larry Janis. Larry posts on Facebook from time to time. I'm sure that's not the only place that he makes his work known, but he's always posting really interesting techie stuff about tube circuitry. And something that, hey, I was a little bit familiar with tube circuitry a long time ago. Hey, as a kid, did you have a tube tester, right? You take your tubes from the non-working TV set down to the Radio Shack or the Kmart and you test them out. Well, Larry does work that's a lot more sophisticated than that. So, Larry, hey, let's get a little background on you first. I understand you've been in broadcast engineering, but you've also done some, fancier stuff.
Indeed, I let me start with my birth to a TV repairman. So almost from the womb, I was around these vacuum tubes, and at an age where I think everybody else was learning transistors. The late '60s and early '70s, the transition to solid state was in full force. However, as you may know, ham operators were loyal to vacuum tubes for many years afterwards. So being a ham, I was imbued in tube culture up through the 70s when I was working at two-way radio shops and repairing, police car radios and such. And this guy came in and he said, "I have a recording truck that drives around the country and records big concerts, and I want to put a burglar alarm, an RF burglar alarm, so I can sit in the hotel room and see if somebody's breaking in." So I built that up for him, and then I kind of started hanging around with these people, these recording people, and developed a full-blown interest in the recording community. And now this was up in Detroit, Michigan. So one of the people up there that I was working for went down to Criteria Studios in Fort Lauderdale, excuse me, in Miami, and they were just knocking it out of the park with the Bee Gees and Julio Iglesias and all these heavy hitters. So this skinny 20-year-old kid with no previous experience in the recording studio field was suddenly working at the biggest studio in the Southeast. No pressure. But having been thrown into the deep end of the pool, I paddled sufficiently to survive, and that became my occupation for the late 70s, all of the 80s, and all of the 90s. Later on, I went to work for the Bee Gees studio as their electronic maintenance guy, and then sort of weaseled my way into the engineering chair. Faders. That was always kind of a side
Hmm.
goal, was to get out of the shop and get into the prime position of recording engineer, which I was somewhat successful at. I got to record a few, you know, famous people, but nonetheless, the electronic maintenance paid the bills all those years. And then around 2000 or so, the last studio that I was working at went out of business, as did many at that time due to computers and Pro Tools and such. So I was kind of a lost sheep. In the studio business. I think, the studios kind of went away. So I didn't have a nice, cool place to go work. So I said, well, I know RF. I'll try radio. It's just like the music business. So I went to work for Gary Blau, the late great Gary Blau, down in Miami for a three-station cluster, and I was there
Oh,
for
wow.
3 or 4 years, maintaining Continentals and Harrises and such. And Nautels, by the way, very reliable transmitters, very, very fine product in Canada. So there you go. I was doing that for a while, but once you get in the music business, it's kind of in your DNA. So I got out of radio and started building vacuum tube compressors based on the old
Oh,
Fairchild circuit, which was extremely popular in the 60s. You had several tube compressors that were very popular. Collins had one, Gates had one, Fairchild had one. They all used the same gain reduction tube. But unlike the Collins and the Gates, the Fairchild was selling at that time for it was selling for $25,000 back then. They sell for
what?
125,000. They sell for 125,000 now. So back
Wow.
then, with the product on the used market selling for 25K, I said, I could sell these for 5 or 6K and do okay, which I did. I built this 50-pound beast that sort of resembled that and used most of its circuit, and that was quite popular. However, in the process of doing so, I had to build my own test equipment because they don't make test equipment for tubes. So, for instance, this thing up here that has 20 tubes in it is a batch tester for testing new tubes. This
Oh,
flat
my
screen
goodness.
over here, this flat screen over here is an audio analyzer. So I built up basically in order to survive, I had to build my and design and build my own test equipment. So sooner or later, writing the code for the test equipment became more fun than soldering wires. It became like these compressors aren't getting built, and Larry's sitting there all day, transfixed with the code. And I got sucked in. I got totally drawn into writing software. And so this led to the net. Oh, by the way, at that point I was about broke, so it was like, okay, maybe I should go get a job. So I took my coding skills and I was writing marine yacht software for about 5 years, up until recently, in fact. And so writing embedded processor code for big yachts to make touch screens open sliding doors and all this fancy stuff. And developing those skills, it seemed like a natural transition for me to put those embedded microcontrollers into my tube products. and that kind of brings us up to date. In the last few years, I've been sticking those embedded controllers into my tube stuff here and controlling it with a phone app, and doing things that seem more modern than just copying dead people's circuits, which anybody who's building vacuum tubes is obviously copying existing art, prior art as they call it. We are kind of merging. Like, we have this circuit board here, has all these relays that get controlled by our microcontroller, and it has this motorized pot. And so what I'm doing here, I think I showed you this a moment ago, but let's see if it wants to behave here. So let's see, I've got a phone app here that I've created, and when I move this slider, you see through the miracle of electronics. Come on, baby, it's backwards.
It's hard to get on screen. Yes, yeah, it went way up and then now down. Yeah.
Right. So now I can hit various buttons on this thing and change the functions. And for instance, this can be placed out near the microphone, and you can run line level to where you're ending up. That gives you better signal to noise ratio. So because I have a touch screen, I have multiple screens here. For instance, that's the Wi-Fi setup page. So there's the main page. Here's a page that's in progress. This is going to be a compressor and EQ. So I am adding to this preamp, through the miracle of digital potentiometers, I am adding an EQ and compressor. I have the compressor working, not the EQ. This is what we would call in recording a channel strip, and what you fellows would call a mic processor, because it's doing all those functions in one convenient package. So that's where we're at here, Kirk. Trying to be modern, like the kids.
That's so cool.
The kids all have their phone apps, and your dishwasher and your dryer have a phone app. So they said, "Oh, Internet of Things." I said, "Oh, well, a mic preamp's a thing. Let's give it connectivity." I've actually operated this preamp remotely. I've opened a port on my router, and this guy down in Miami was, I was moving the fader here in Fort Lauderdale, and the thing was moving in Miami. So you can do remote control. I don't know, how practical that is, but you can if you want. So I'm trying to do things that are like this century, trying to merge vacuum tubes and this century, and so far so good. This is pretty new, so we hope to be building these very shortly.
I'm going to want to get into whatever you're willing to tell us about the merging of these technologies. I didn't even realize until we got started that you have a touch screen on that mic preamp, and you did let me know it's a mic preamp there. I'd like to understand, how do you get, what are your inspirations for, and what problems there may be about getting two technologies to go together. We got a break coming up here, so kind of think about answering that and what you can educate us engineers who don't get to deal with this stuff, but are sure curious about the merging of technologies and what problems that may bring. And I'll give a very quick example. There was 20 years ago, a transmitter manufacturer, not my advertiser, but another one who's well regarded, asked the company I work for, Omnia, to build a single board audio processor to put into their transmitter. And we, through a great deal of difficulty, our Omnia guys designed that. And in the long run, we decided it really wasn't a good idea, at least not in their transmitter with their current technology. There was a lot of RF in their transmitter, and keeping their RF out of our audio processor proved to be quite a challenge. And you wouldn't have thought so, because the thing looked very well built and no other, obvious quality problem. So I'm curious as to what you're going to tell us after the break about merging these technologies together, and what you've learned and what you found is important and what you found maybe is not important. You can just do this and it works fine. So I'd love to hear about that. Our show, This Week in Radio Tech, is brought to you in part by two amazing sponsors. You probably know them and love them, but I'm going to tell you about them anyway. One of them's Angry Audio. And Angry Audio, they don't make any tube gear. They use a lot of modern circuitry. They're really good at Angry Audio about keeping mindful of grounding, so that grounds are separated where they need to be and common where they also need to be. So you get some very quiet operation with Angry Audio gear. But we're going to show you a webpage here from about the gadgets and gizmos. Their slogan is "Problems disappear when you get angry." You need, as an engineer, you need to take it upon yourself to go to the Angry Audio website and just look at the solutions they have. Have these in mind when you're planning your next studio or planning on improving a studio that you have, maybe building a home studio for, one of your talent that's on the air. Take a look at their website with all the gadgets and gizmos, because there are things in here that I promise you will use. Hey, I've used the headphone gizmo and the guest gizmo in the radio station I built last summer. In fact, we started building it about a year ago, and that's WBZK FM in Oxford, Mississippi, right there near Ole Miss University. And we got a headphone gizmo for the on-the-air guy, for the jock, and we got the guest gizmos for, of course, the guests. And these were so easy to install. They come with the accessories that you need, power supplies. They come with, of course, instructions. The guest gizmo, you drill a round hole and you put this square box in there, and it just looks absolutely amazing. It is so cool. Makes you look like you know what you're doing in the world of carpentry as well. Also on the screen right now, you might see the studio signal light. Those are cool. You can pay elsewhere a lot of money for these stackable studio signal lights, or you can contact Angry Audio, or better yet, one of their dealers, and get you some stackable studio signal lights at a much more reasonable price. They are just so cool. Also, something else that they have at Angry Audio is these little gadgets, these little adapters that let you connect GPIO and audio to the common satellite receivers that are out there in our industry. And you don't have to do any soldering at all. You can plug these things in, plug a Cat5 cable in, and run that audio and run that GPIO where you need to. Just really awesome stuff. Of course, the mic processing and the Bluetooth gadget and the new Rave radio mixing console. Check it out, angryaudio.com. So glad to have Angry Audio as one of our sponsors. Another sponsor is Max Connect. Now, Max Connect, years ago, we started advertising their Max Connect wireless product, which gives you an internet connection in places that may be a little bit difficult, but also if you have a crowded area, if you're in an urban area, or maybe there's a stadium near your transmitter site, or where you're doing a remote from, or maybe you're doing a remote from the stadium, you get prioritized data with Max Connect wireless. Well, Max Connect has expanded to do a lot more things too. It's now called the Max Connect Group. And the Max Connect Group, they offer services at your facility to get done some of the things that you've never had time to do. Maybe you didn't have the expertise to do. And Max Connect Group will send out one or a crew of very qualified engineers to build new studios, to fix up your transmitter site, to install new transmitters, audio processing. Hey, maybe you think your audio processing isn't what it could be. Well, the Max Connect Group has real experts in audio processing who can work on site or remotely if you give them the access to. Also, they can come in. One of the most difficult things, I think, is good quality remote control of your transmitter site. And Max Connect Group, these guys are absolute experts at getting your remote controls hooked up, wired up, programmed up. And so you have access from anywhere to take care of, look at all the parameters of your transmitter site. Whether it's a simple job or something really complex, Max Connect Group can handle that. Their website is Max Connect. I know it's spelled funny. There's a link in the show notes, MAXXKONNECT, because the internet. Max Connect and Max Connect Group is who's sponsoring our show and offering you really good services. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your help on This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack. Chris Tarr is traveling today, but we are with Mr. Larry Janis, who develops audio circuits with vacuum tubes. And there's some good reasons why he likes vacuum tubes, like a lot of people do. And he's going to talk to us more now about the merging of modern technology, like we just saw, Wi-Fi remote control of vacuum tube circuitry. Larry, I don't know where you want to go with this explanation, but I'll just follow along if you want to tell us kind of the why and wherefore and what you found out in doing these projects.
Yeah, anybody that integrates digital and high gain audio, when you've got digital signals flying next to 70 dB of high gain audio, you're going to find out who's isolated and who's not. So I've tried to use all the proper hygiene techniques of isolated grounds, analog ground, digital ground, etc. And there was a learning curve, I think, with any company that tries to merge analog and digital. You find out the hard way that you're going to do your best and still hear nee 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 coming out of your audio, and oh man, here we go. But what really surprised me the most in my urge to merge was Wi-Fi. I had to put this Wi-Fi antenna on the back of this thing. I wanted a nice inboard antenna that was sleek and svelte, but oh no. And I was picking up the Wi-Fi, and I'm going, how do tubes demodulate 2.4 gigahertz? That didn't make any sense, but indeed that was the case. So the only surprise on the road to connectivity was that the Wi-Fi was getting into vacuum tube amplification. I wouldn't have put that on my bingo card. So yeah, I would advise anybody integrating Wi-Fi to keep your RF away from your high gain stages. But I guess broadcast engineers probably know about that, don't they? Yeah, yeah.
One thing that what you're showing there is a mic preamp, so you are dealing with a very low level input signal. What are some of the design techniques that you can use in a tube circuit to keep the noise level as low as possible, any self noise from the preamp, so that you're really amplifying just what's coming out of the microphone?
Oh, well, the selection of the first tube stage determines your noise figure to a large degree. So, you can spend hundreds of dollars on a Gucci 12AX7, and you'll find one that's sufficiently low noise. I try to find something in the middle that's affordable, but there are crazy versions of a 12AX7 that run pretty darn quiet. For most people, that's not a problem. And I do have I am cheating a little. I have a JFET circuit for the first 20 dB of gain. So 50 dB of gain is all tubes, but I do use a JFET to bring it up because it would be simply impractical to get that much gain from a three tube preamp to get the required 70 dB. But the JFET has the saturation characteristics of a tube. So when I switch in the solid state, I don't. It's not like people are holding their ears going, "Ugh, solid state." So I think that's the practical reality in this modern age, because tubes are not easier to find than they were before. A lot of them are only available from Russia or China,
Hmm.
and of course you have to buy a large batch of them to weed out the duds. So it's not an efficient process, and I don't expect it to get better. There are a few companies who are threatening to make tubes again. We'll see about that. I think that's a black art. Maybe some of that knowledge went away with those guys that were making it. So yeah, tubes. I mean, you're never going to get the equivalent of a solid state mic preamp. You're going to be down at minus 80 or so. You'll never get down to minus 100 with tubes. But is that necessary? I,
Mhm.
I tell them to play louder. Uh,
There you go. I love it.
Come on.
Okay, guys. So if
I
the
tell,
input state if the input stage is a JFET, are there any design techniques that are critical there? Oh, and also, can you provide um, common mode power? What's the word I'm looking for? Um,
Phantom?
Thank you, phantom power. Can you provide phantom power with that setup?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the mic preamp puts out phantom. The two push-pull JFETs just give me an additional 20 dB. So the two tubes, because they're triodes, pentodes give you more gain. These give you about 50 dB. And then the additional JFET is switched in with relays. So when you have that out of circuit, it's hardwired bypass. But when you kick that in, uh, yeah, you get an additional 20 dB to for low levels mic sources. The only consideration is, with JFETs, it's also hard to find quiet ones. So there's been no real emphasis on high quality audio FETs until recently. There's a whole new batch of JFETs that have hit the market that I'm anxious to try. But my previous experiences, same problem as tubes. I would have to go through a lot of modern components to find really quiet ones. I don't think any conversation about tubes is complete without transformers, though. Because in professional audio in particular, because the signals are balanced, you tend to see a transformer on the stem and stern of your circuitry. So the sonic characteristics of vacuum tubes are one thing, the soft clipping and all those wonderful attributes, but the imperfections of audio transformers are also part of the allure of vintage audio. So here we
Oh,
have
hmm,
some of you old buzzards may remember these UTC transformers. These were very common in the 50s and 60s, and
yeah.
in their metal can. And these things sell for a king's ransom on eBay now. I was telling Kirk last week when I was speaking to him that when I first got into the recording business, and I assume this is true in radio, we were on a mission to remove every audio transformer we could find because hey, look at that square wave, So we would go around ripping out all the audio transformers in our chain, and yeah, it would produce a nice square wave, but something was missing. All those great 60s records that we grew up on that were recorded through a chain of 30 transformers, guess what? There's all this phase shift and all of this other imperfection that apparently our ears are accustomed to and consider pleasant. So by the 90s, people were scurrying to put transformers back in their audio chains in the recording studio. In fact, one of the most popular transformers, you broadcast engineers will appreciate this, that gigantic bucket of Western Electric line matching transformer that you use on a conditioned phone line. There
Yes.
are people in the recording business that hook those up with patch cords and run their signal through that, and it's Valhalla to their ears listening to this giant
Wow. Wow.
bucket of iron. And these things are doorstops in half of these stations, right? But hang on to them because they are worth a lot of money. Uh, yeah, there you go. But anyway, the transformers have imperfections that we seem to like. Now, here's a modern day recreation. This one is from, whatever, 1960 or something. And here is one that my transformer manufacturer, AMI, has recreated. And we spent a couple of years getting these right. I mean, it took, many samples, and, I've got my AB switch hooked up and I'm listening to both of them, switching back and forth between them. And I think we got it because he's now selling thousands of them to my competitors. So maybe that wasn't such a bright idea. But yeah, the discussion of tubes and why you like tubes, particularly in pro audio, almost has to include the inclusion of transformers as part of the coloration and imperfection that we call ear candy. The harmonic structure of tubes. In fact, I use a push-pull circuit. Ask any guitar player about push-pull tube amps. They like the way those particular harmonics color the sound. So,
Ah,
again, as I was saying in the other phone call, in the early days of digital sounded kind of harsh. So in the 80s and 90s, digital had a real aggressive quality, particularly for oversampling. And so we would use all these transformers and all these old tube pieces of gear to deburr the edges off of this waveform that was trying to take your head off. And it was a band-aid for harsh sound back then. Now digital is extremely neutral. What you put in and what you get out are pretty indistinguishable. So we use we still use the sonic coloration of these transformers to like a spice rack to cook. You say, okay, I've got this neutral recording medium. What do I want to do in front of it or after it to impart some imperfection? And so there's a huge market in that. And for that Fairchild to be selling for $125,000, apparently somebody is somebody is quite keen on this. Of course, in the world of DAWs, there's people building plugins that get awfully close, but some of us still like rocking it old school, being an old school person. So you know what? They can write plugins, but they still need to get from the mic to the DAW. So that's
That's right.
gonna
That's
be
right.
my job here. Yeah.
Talk to me about the electronics that I see. The screen there, not only the screen, the beautiful meter display that's on the screen, and then how whatever is the operating system or the computer is behind that. That must go out and touch, as you mentioned, relays like the plus or minus 20 dB from the JFET. Um,
Right.
how is that computer designed? What are you using there?
Okay, it's called an embedded processor, and
Huh?
so on this board we have various relays that do functions like high pass filter in and out, attenuator pad, et cetera, et cetera. And those are all controlled from an I2C bus here, backwards here, being decoded from an I2C bus that comes from a little tiny microcontroller chip about an inch square that I don't have in front of me, and that chip lives behind the screen. So this is not an operating system. It's what they call an embedded processor or bare metal,
Uh-huh.
where you power it up and it just starts working. I'm sure
Yeah.
a lot of your tele products are like that. They don't really have an OS. They just boom, come up and start working. So that's all written in C++. And I found these screens while I was working in the yachting business because, rich people love touch screens. So I learned how to make these look kind of nice doing yacht stuff. And the original version of this, which is on my website, and it's because none of this has been updated, was just a little 1 inch square OLED. And about 6 months ago, I said, I bet I could shoehorn a flat screen in here. And as soon as I did, I realized, oh man, now I can have different pages with different things. So what happened is I ripped all the buttons off. Originally, it had analog buttons on it, and I made everything virtual. I think a lot of manufacturers are moving to touch screens with the realization that by the time you buy a bunch of real push buttons, you've paid for your screen. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it cost me the same money to put this screen as it did to put 8 buttons in an OLED on this thing. So I'm a big believer in this interface. I know people are getting a little burned out on touchscreens in their cars. I think there's a backlash there, but I don't find this to be offensive to anybody who isn't, totally modern. I mean, it would be nice to have a real analog meter, but guess what? Those are getting hard to find too. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I found an image of an old Weston meter from the 50s,
Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
shrunk it in Photoshop, and here I go. So yeah, this feels more what's the word? More relevant to 2024 than just there's a lot of cloners out there. They just sort of copy old designs and live off of other people's hard work from the 50s and 60s or the 30s with some of them. I didn't want to keep doing that. It's like a musician. When you grow up, you're like copying other people, and then you're trying to get your own sound. So I said, okay, I'm going to put processors and tubes together, and as Bill Murray says, dogs and cats living together.
That's right. We kind of have a show title. That's a good show title. Dogs and cats
Right.
living together.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my gosh.
this was my third midlife crisis. The second one was becoming a recovering broadcast engineer and going over the wall and building tube gear in the early 2000s. And then the third one was, all my friends who had learned to write software in the 80s were fabulously wealthy. And I was going, maybe I should have taken that fork in the road. But anyway, much later in life, I started to learn programming. And as I mentioned, became totally addicted. And that's what I'm working on right now. After the show is some programming for Manley Labs, who build fine audio gear. So I've expanded my ability to other companies, and so we're fully committed. This is how I plan to fall over dead with a mouse in my hand.
I'm gonna. We'll have some questions about what you're doing at Manley Labs. We're gonna take a break, but when we come back, I've got one question that is always a burning question for me. The company I work for, Telos Alliance, make a number of products that have audio metering on them, and it seems to me that the metering is chosen by the developer of that product or the lead developer of that product. In other words, I'm not going to say there's no standard. I mean, it's calibrated and marked off on products where it needs to be, and on other products, the metering is there kind of to let you know there's some audio there. I am really interested in the in metering ballistics and watching a meter move and watch it decay. You know, watch that. So I'm interested in the meter that you have on that mic preamp and how you came up with the metering ballistics. If it's a library you just reached and grabbed, or if you developed it yourself, or one of the consoles that Telos that Axia made, the Element console, had several different choices for the metering ballistics. I always liked the Nordic meters. I just thought they were sexy looking. Never was a big fan of the PPM meters that they use in Britain. And I like. My favorite, though, are the good old huge VU meters that you find on old Autogram brand consoles. I just felt that they were very representative to my eye of what I was hearing with my ear. But anyway, when we come back, I want to hear about the metering ballistics, if you have anything to say about that, and then we'll hear about what you're doing at Manly. This Week in Radio Tech, I'm Kirk Harnack. Chris Tarr is on the road, and our guest is Larry Janis, and I'm finding this conversation to be just fascinating. We're brought to you in part by Broadcasters General Store, and one of the lines they represent, of course, is Broadcast Tools. You know Broadcast. If you haven't put in at least 5 or 6 Broadcast Tools products in your life, how can you even call yourself an engineer? I mean, they make all kinds of stuff. And one of them that I have never gotten to use yet, but my goodness, I sure could have in a lot of locations. In fact, I probably still could use one of these. It's called the IO Sentinel 4G2. It is a web-based GPIO interface. What does that mean? Well, let me tell you about it. It's a robust, course, full-featured Ethernet-based data acquisition and remote control device. It has 4 optically isolated logic inputs and 4 programmable relays for outputs. The IO Sentinel 4G2's 4 optically isolated inputs can be configured for wet or dry contact closure or status logic monitoring. The 4 1-amp single-pole double-throw relay outputs can be configured for on or off, pulsed, or for what they call reboot operation. It can be controlled and monitored locally or remotely over any IP network, including private networks, IP-based industrial control networks, or the public internet. And you can operate the product using, of course, a web browser or any web-enabled mobile device like your phone. Email notification is built in. That can be configured to alert up to 8 email or SMS email addresses. There's logging of system status along with the site ID that can be emailed in time spans from once an hour to once a day or upon a trigger. SNMP traps and set get are there to allow multiple units to be monitored and controlled with SNMP management software. And that makes Chris Tarr's socks roll up and down. So here's some cool things about it. I mentioned there are 4 SPDT, single pole double throw relay outputs. There's also the plug-in Euroblock screw terminals for status and relay connections, so they're easy to work with. You have a built-in web server to provide web-based notification, monitoring, configuration, and control. You also have the 9 front panel IO activity LED indicators, so you can see what's going on, both inputs and outputs. That rear panel RJ45 for your Ethernet connection. It's fully RFI proofed design, and surge protected power relay there. Here's something cool though that I like. You can have this to be single ended. In other words, you can put it somewhere and you can browse into it and look at what's coming in for closures, and you can effectuate closures going out. But you can also pair them up over distance. You could have one of these in Timbuktu and the other one in West Undershirt, Arkansas, and have them talk to each other over the public internet. And you give a closure at one end and it makes a relay happen at the other end, and vice versa. And it logs all that, and you can watch it with a web browser or effect those controls yourself. So it can be an end-to-end product. Maybe you've got to put satellite receivers at the transmitter site and bring those closures back as accurately as possible to the studio. Well, you can do that with this device. So cool. The Broadcast Tools IO Sentinel 4G2, the web-based GPIO interface. And where do you get it? Well, of course, from Broadcasters General Store. Love these folks. I've been buying from them ever since I was Sam Phillips engineer in Memphis, Tennessee. Sam would put a list together of what he wanted. He'd say, "Hey, Kurt, call them pretty girls up there at BGS and tell them what I want to buy. Had them get their extra sharp pencils out." So that's my Sam Phillips invitation. Appreciate the BGS at bgs.cc, the website, or 352-622-7700. See, I've got that memorized. Check them out. Thanks a lot, BGS, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. And thanks to Broadcast Tools as well. Hey, I'm Kirk here in the Telos Alliance studio in Nashville, Tennessee, and Larry Janis is my guest. We're talking about this really cool integration of tubes and modern electronics, if you will. And I asked Larry to see about this question about metering ballistics. You got anything to say about that, Larry?
Oh, I'm going to go ballistic just talking about it. The first thing I want to say is that the web-based GPIO and this have amazing similarities, so great segue. The thing about ballistics is I tried to copy an actual legit VU meter, which I think is a 200 millisecond response time. This latest processor has 2 cores, so I'm dedicating 1 core strictly to metering. So it was able to get that metering refresh screen time to be so fast that the thing was jumping around like way too fast. And I actually had to slow it down. So I imparted a 200 millisecond delay in the polling of the meter, and it suddenly settled right down. It's a shame I can't plug audio into it, but basically it bounces around like an old school VU meter. I have the ability to do peak. In fact, as you mentioned, the British people are, oh, when are you going to put the PPMs on it? Yeah, buddy. So I'll get there. It's easy enough to do. But I'm totally familiar with how to use a VU meter. For instance, VU meters are so slow that if you record a snare drum at 0, you're actually recording it at 10 dB over. So as long as you know that percussive sounds have to be under-recorded, you're fine. PPMs are useful for seeing that your snare drum is in fact recording at +10. But I'm so used to, like you said, big old school, slow-moving VU meters that that's how my brain wants to look at level. So I have a bar graph that's more or less PPM, and I have as close as I could get to a VU meter ballistic. The 200 millisecond, I believe, is the stated response of a D-Arsenal, whatever they call it, analog meter with a selenium rectifier in it. Yeah, that's what we grew up on, by golly, and that's what we're going to have here.
Well, I like, and I didn't. Thanks for pointing out the peak meter on the bar graph that's under it. I did not realize that was there because I hadn't seen it work yet. I'd love to have you do a video with some close up of that and put that somewhere where we can see that. That'd be cool to observe. When you showed the circuit board, I saw a lot of rectangular boxes, and I think you were pointing out that those are relays. Tell me, we haven't talked about capacitors or other passive devices that are in there. Any particular care in selecting some of those passive components that are around the active components?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm using WEMA capacitors. Those are these red babies here. Those are generally considered to be good sounding. Nothing special in the resistor department, although I try to use, in the high gain stages, slightly quieter, but the rest of it is pretty garden variety. And yeah, these relays do the same thing as if you built this preamp with switches, but of course, because it has to be controlled from the front panel and also remotely, toggling relays is the only practical way to do that. But with regard to audio quality passive components, other than the coupling caps, it's such a simple circuit. There's not, that's the beauty of tube stuff. It's remarkably simple. And so you have an input transformer, a tube, another tube, and an output transformer. And the whole thing is push-pull. So it's there's not much to get in the way, really. If you consider that an op-amp has 50 transistors in it, this ain't bad. This is pretty minimalist, Yeah, I don't have a harsh opinion of solid state like some tube purists do. There's really a time and a place for everything. Uh, when I record at home, I use solid state preamps on the kick and snare because I like the edge, and I use tube preamps on the overheads because it captures the kit with a very authentic almost 3D sound. Tubes seem to have more dynamic range. As you know, when transistors run out of gas, you're actually hitting the rail and squaring the waveform. Some people call that a broadcast processor, by the way. Um,
I hear you.
clippings, anybody? Clippings, anybody? Yeah. Okay. So, but the tubes. In fact, I tried to build a composite clipper using tubes. How's that for you? I thought, this might sound good. It didn't, but it was worth a try. Um, so, but tubes do saturate more gradually, so they kind of, you can get them in a sweet zone before they completely fall apart, where they're actually producing a higher harmonic content. Uh,
Right.
I've had people complain with this thing, that this is it sounds too clean, and I would actually changed a few things to try to make it less perfect sounding. 'Cause that's not what you want to hear. It sounds like my solid state preamp. What's the point, right? So yeah, this is fun. This spice rack I speak of, of using various imperfections in audio to color the sound. I imagine that the typical radio station all digital plant is also sounding pretty neutral these days with everything just specs out perfectly all the way through. Um, so maybe there's opportunities to put some coloration in the broadcast, Jane, but I'm not, I'm not, I'm not in that field anymore, so I don't know what's going on. I think a bunch of IT people came in to do the broadcast engineering. We should talk about that, the lack of new candidates in engineering, because computer science pulls them all away,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the thinning ranks of people that want to carry be on call to go, run through a field full of snakes and alligators to put the transmitter back on the air. I kind of enjoyed it. It was kind of, our AM site was out in the Everglades, and you were literally. I looked out. I came in the transmitter building and I saw a big machete. I was like, "What's that for?" He goes, "You'll find out." I looked under my truck and there was this giant 7-foot snake, and I said, "Oh boy, I don't like this." Um, one time I had a power transfer switch catch on fire, and
Mhm.
when you're halfway between the shore power and the generator, if you accidentally get it halfway and halfway, they have been known to explode and send you through the next wall. So
Right.
I got out of broadcasting a few months after that incident. I said, keeping Celine Dion pumping out the antenna isn't worth my life here. I'm going to go build tube stuff. But I have a fondness for broadcast engineering because any ham operator who built a 100-watt transmitter that's suddenly working on a 20,000-watt transmitter is in hog heaven. And we were on a 12-station combiner. I actually got to witness the replacement of the ERA combiner at the master antenna down there, and I just
Mhm.
love that stuff. Tuned filters and all this backfeeding the I call it IBOC to show my age, but backfeeding the HD into the reverse port, and all this cool stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, that was just great. And that system is running to this day quite well.
Hey,
Uh,
I've been there. I've been in that room and got to see that. I don't remember if it was
yeah,
Gary or a different engineer that showed me through there.
yeah,
Gary Blau, who you mentioned
yeah,
earlier.
yeah. He was
But yeah, been there.
right. So he was my introduction to broadcast engineering, and what a great guy to learn from, to mentor. I followed him around like a puppy, and sad to see him go. He had a great call sign, W1AM, because he was AM. I had, by the way, he got me into AM ham. So how these guys convert old Collins and Gates transmitters for 75 meters. So I built up a system using a Macintosh modulator and an Optimod AM. Okay, And you know what those things sound like. I was getting signal reports from Holland,
Oh my
and
goodness.
so 75 meters is great because all these old buzzards get on there with their processors or got that deep audio, and they're all DJ. They all have that DJ voice. And sitting in the corner is what do you call it? RCA 1K. Um, so that's kind of a very romantic portion of ham radio. So he got me into that. And but broadcasting, the problem I was having in the broadcasting field is that I wasn't doing much hands-on repair. I was turning into this guy that was taking boards out and sticking them in a FedEx, and wasn't doing much component level work.
Ah,
Um,
yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's sort of like these days everything is so replace the module that I think you could maybe that was the idea to train less skilled people to do the job. So I wasn't getting my reward in that field, but I do have a fondness for it. And broadcasting is I don't know. I grew up in that era when it was just sort of a like when you would see the radio station with the glass window and you'd see the DJ on the air. And, that was like I don't know. That guy was really important. I think that's still true, but of course there's been a lot of diversification and certain affiliates buying everything that was taller than it was wide in the 90s. So you know where that went. There's been some thinning of the herd and
Yeah.
sort of souring of the potential. We were talking about in our phone call about the transition to streaming and the idea of the 1,000-foot tower versus many honeycombs of smaller towers creating a grid-like structure. And I think both are viable. And tell me this: you have stations in other countries, right? That they still depend heavily on the radio side of it rather than the streaming, right? Is
Well,
that correct?
actually, the station that's most descriptive of that analysis would be the one in American Samoa. Technically, it's part of America, but it's a territory. It's governed by the FCC, but because of some interesting political situations there, like the people who own the teleport nixed the idea of getting an undersea cable because why do we need that when we have our teleport? So internet in Samoa until the last 5, 6, 8 years or so, internet's been extremely slow and extremely expensive, and so streaming audio wasn't a thing. And only recently has it become more of a thing. It's still expensive, but it's more attainable for people at home and on their cell phones. So yes, that factor radio is still very, very popular in American Samoa. 30 years ago, when Larry Fuss and I first went to Samoa, Larry looked around, looked at the dismal state of the radio stations that were there, and you couldn't get internet. Well, of course, it was tougher in the 90s anyway, but Larry said, we go on the air, we're going to have 3/4 of this island listening to us within inside of a week. And he says, I'm going to order 10,000 bumper stickers. That's one for every car on the island. And Larry, we gave away, I want to say we gave away all 10,000 of them within 6 months or so. So
Nice,
yeah.
nice. Well, I meant to say because I see your Telus shirt there that I owe Telus a great deal of gratitude for making me a ton of money. In the 90s, the studios were struggling to get bookings, so we would do various diversifications like doing audio post-production. And one of the
Yeah.
more lucrative portions of audio for video was doing automatic dialogue replacement for
ADR. Yeah.
Hollywood studios. For
Yeah.
Hollywood studios. So what would happen is Florida became a place to shoot feature films. So you'd have Dom DeLuise and Demi Moore and Gene Hackman down here. And what would happen is they'd be shooting a film, and their previous film would be in post-production. So the studio would call up and say, can we get Demi Moore in there to do some lines for this film? Here's the script. And you would put the 3 beeps before they talk, and you would lock up a 3/4 video machine. So using the Zephyr ISDN codec, Hollywood would connect with us, and they would sit there and run the session from Hollywood, and they could actually hit play on their work print and our work print would leap to life. We had the serial, we had the time code running in both directions, and we
Right.
had the offset figured out. We figured out what the delay of the ISDN time code frames were, and it worked perfectly. They would hit play, beep beep beep, say my line, beep beep beep, say my line again, and $250 an hour. So we were struggling to get 50 or $100 an hour to record music, but man, you talk about gravy, doing dialogue replacement for $250 an hour. So I think Telus kept us in business in 1997. So
Wow.
thanks so much.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
thanks.
that Zephyr got
Yeah.
around. When I got into broadcasting, of course, I was doing the Zephyr remotes everywhere. In the Bahamas. I went to
Oh, yeah.
Jamaica, and I did pre-arrangements for getting an ISDN line in Montego Bay, and I'm on the phone with the guy, and I said, "Well, what's my SPID number?" He goes, "It doesn't matter. You're the only connection on the island."
Larry, we got to take our last break, and I forgot, as I usually do. It's my tradition. I forgot to warn you about our last little short 3-minute segment where you are going to give some sage advice to our audience about whatever you like. But some sage advice, probably related to our topic. Maybe a resource, a website. You'd like to send them to your website. Maybe you'd like to take 100 pre-orders for your mic pre, whatever. Just be ready for that in about 2 minutes from right now. I'm Kirk Harnack. It's This Week in Radio Tech, and I'm such a bad host. I always have to surprise my guests with that information and put them on the spot. I'm sorry. We're brought to you in part by Broadcast Bionics, and the coolest thing around, I'm telling you what, some people are jealous of this little box. It's kind of a big box. It's the virtual rack from Broadcast Bionics. What is virtual rack? Well, more and more broadcast infrastructure, and I mean audio consoles, on-air phone systems, audio processing, intercom systems, more and more of them are available as containerized software. Containerized software. That means you can load up a server with a bunch of different functionalities. Hey, you could put 4, 5, 6, 10 audio consoles into one of these virtual racks. Telos Alliance does some of these. Sound 4 has products available, and 2WCOM has some codecs available that all run as Docker containers in a server. Now, I got to tell you, installing this stuff and arranging it, configuring it inside is not child's play. Please take my word for it. The whole Docker world, especially when you get into the internal networking that needs to go with it and the real-time nature of the processing that has to go on. This is not just installing an app, unless, of course, you're getting a Broadcast Bionic virtual rack. Because the idea here is they've done all the hard work for you. They get the virtual rack. It's an actual computer server. Get it into your broadcast facility, turn it on, browse into it, and there's like a candy store in there of the different virtualized products from different manufacturers to choose from. Let's say you choose a phone system from Telos and maybe an audio processor from Omnia. You click on those, they install typically in under a minute. They download and install. You give it the IP addresses that you want them to have, and now you've got the inputs and outputs via LiveWire or AES67. You've got whether it's telephony or whether it's stereo audio for getting processed. All that it just happens in the network, and with the virtual rack, you don't have to manage any of that stuff yourself. There's no command line Linux or Docker, CLI that you have to learn. You can see some of the screens here that Suncast is showing you on the screen of how you set this stuff up. You choose a few options. You can also choose some redundancy or not. It's just as easy as can be. Choose the Ethernet port as shown here. You can also choose to have a backup copy. Now, the products themselves, they work in their demo mode until you license them from their respective manufacturers. So you get the virtual rack from Broadcast Bionics, and then you want to install an audio console from Axia, install that, call your favorite Axia dealer, and buy the license to turn this audio console on. You want 4 faders, 8 faders, 16 faders, 20 faders, whatever you want. You license that many. Do you want WebRTC so you can do live remotes? with another browser. You got that too. You can license that. Broadcast Bionics has made this just so simple. If you go to this webpage, if you scroll down there to the bottom, you'll see some videos that Dan McQuillan has recorded. He also did a Twirt episode with us about a year ago, where he talks very in depth about how this works. So slick, so cool. Broadcast Bionics. Go to bionics.co.uk. Bionics.co.uk and check it out. Available at a lot of different dealers around the world, and you're gonna love this. I'm doing this. Sadly, I didn't get the Bionics method of doing it. I rolled my own server, but I had a lot of help from the Telos people. Could I have done this myself? I'm not sure. Bionics makes it easy peasy. It works. Guaranteed. You're going to love it. Thanks a lot to Broadcast Bionics for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Hey, we've just got 2 or 3 minutes left, and Larry Janis is our guest this week. Larry's got quite a colorful history and a colorful present. Larry, do you have a tip of the week for our viewers and listeners?
I do, but I'm wondering if I can come back on again just to watch your cool commercials. So far, these 2 last breaks have been like, wow, these broadcast people are on it. I feel like some of the pro audio people are not as up to date with this connectivity thing. So very impressive. You're going, wow, this is cool. And I'm watching your breaks going, wow, that's a cool thing.
Well, thank you.
So there you go. Real quick, I didn't mention Manly Labs. I'm working on some audio hi-fi products for them, basically doing the same thing. I can't get into specifics, but basically putting, digital control into tube audio products. There's a lot of similarity. And so hopefully those will be out next year or soon. And I made a graphic here. Here's my website, tubes.net.
The number 2, UBES. Okay.
Yeah. So, and you'll see pictures of the previous version because I haven't really finished this one yet. So that's kind of lagging. I'm a one guy in his shed kind of company. So that means that the web presence is probably a few months behind. This is actually brand new. This whole touchscreen thing came about within the last few months. So words of wisdom, do what you want. I guess my first words of wisdom is I should have gotten into code 30 years earlier because I discovered that merging hardware and software is a passion. Like I say, if I want to move a button, before I had to get out the Unibit, now I just drag that button over on a screen. So that flexibility of being able to make virtual panels, you guys know all this. I'm preaching to the choir, but yeah, it's an age of connectivity, and I felt like this was my calling because I already knew how to make pretty good sounding tube stuff. So building these microcontrollers into it, follow your dream. I think embedded architecture for both tube and non-tube electronics is only going to skyrocket. I mean, look at the breaks you're playing here. It's all stuff that is parallel to this, So as I say, you guys seem to be on it already. I'm trying to bring the field of pro audio into that realm of connectivity, and I'm having the time of my life. Thank you for letting me show you the last few years. During the pandemic, when everybody was on their couch getting fat, I was designing this. So something good came out of all that hibernation. If I could just get myself to leave the house now, that'd be okay.
That's often good advice. Follow your dream, but it's often the second part of that's left out. Follow your dream, but you got to work at it. It doesn't
have a day job.
Happen.
Have a day job. If you're going to be a musician, if you're going to be a jazz musician, have some money coming in. So yeah, I've been thrown into the deep end of the code pool now, and was somehow able to support myself. Like I say, that was my third midlife crisis. So I'm hoping I stay in this field, as I say, till I keel over. Probably right in this room because I have all my meals here, and my whole existence is in a 12 by 12 prison cell. But thank you for inviting me, or inviting them into my personal tube Valhalla. And anytime you want me to spew more of this, just give me a ring. You just wind me up, and this is what you get.
Well, Larry, thank you
Thanks,
so
Chris.
much for joining us. I sure appreciate it. I wish Chris Tarr could have been here. Maybe he'll be here next week. Larry Janis will get his website and a bunch of other show notes. I got a whole bunch of notes from today's show. Look at how interesting Larry is. See all that? Look at all that. We'll have that in the show notes. Thanks so much to Larry, and thanks so much to Suncast for producing today's show. And let's give good wishes to Chris Tarr for safe travels. He is traveling through Texas today. We'll be back with you next week for another episode of This